He
Yeah.
still has a grandson alive. No,
Oh my God.
I'm not kidding. He doesn't have a great-grandson. He doesn't have a great-grandson. He has a grandson. He has a dude who's like, hey, granddad. And that was John Tyler, born in 1790. To me, this is one of the most amazing pieces of trivia, political or not. How could a dude born in 1790 have a grandson? Hey, welcome back to another episode of WTF History, episode 3. And I'm here with my fellow presenter, Mike Gatto. Hey, Mike, how are you doing?
Great to be here.
Today, our subject matter, our theme rather, is going to be presidents.
Yes.
And why don't you go first, Mike?
All right. So what I wanted to talk about today, and hopefully make the audience say WTF, is the strange and fascinating career of Martin Van Buren, our 8th president. And we begin by saying, something that almost nobody, and I've tested them, almost nobody knows. And you say, who is the only president for whom English was a second language? And a lot of people will say, well, that hasn't happened, or, that's going to happen some point in the future when we have, somebody, who is raised speaking Spanish, but that hasn't happened, blah, blah, blah. Well, the answer, of course, is Martin Van Buren. He and his wife both spoke Dutch as their first language, and they spoke English with a thick accent, particularly his wife. She was almost impossible to understand. Martin Van Buren was also the first president who had no British heritage. The first part of our country, of course, was a very ethnically homogenous time in our country. And so Martin Van Buren was the first president who is not of British descent. But then really, it's also these random things about Martin Van Buren that I think are so fascinating that I didn't know, that I think people out there will say, what the hell? So he wins the presidency in 1836. And one of the first things that he almost does is fight a war with Canada. They actually fought a pretty big battle at the border that included sinking a U.S. steamboat. And then during his presidency, there were 2 insurrections, 2 things that he had to put down that ran the risk of becoming a civil war. There was one in Vermont and one in Maine. So obviously the northern border was a very, very strange hotspot during his presidency.
Yeah.
He loses re-election in 1840. But the fascinating thing that came out of that election is the murky origins of our phrase that we still say 1,000 times a day, and that is okay. And I should preface this by saying historians debate how much of this is true and the true origins of okay. But the best thing that we can determine is that during that election that he lost, the election of 1840, his opponent ran with the slogan of Old Tippecanoe. Right?
And Tyler too.
Tippecanoe. He had been a war hero in Tippecanoe. And so, Van Buren's people responded by saying Old Kinderhook, which is where he was from. And that got shortened to okay. People then, started to turn that on him, just like people, take a slogan today like MAGA, and they turn that into a pejorative somehow. But they started to say, well, okay doesn't stand for Old Kinderhook. It stands for the fact that, he and his predecessor, Andrew Jackson, could not spell. And so they had to sign bills with okay, like I okayed it, as opposed to, and they meant this to be a misspelling of, certain words. So, which is fascinating. But the fact that we still have this as a, part of speech, the whole world, right? I mean, you go to Italy and they'll say va bene, okay, which means, like it's okay.
Right. Yeah.
Right? And the fact that you hear this spoken in Mexico, you hear this spoken in
Africa. Yeah.
And it all just came from like a slogan from the 1840 presidential race is so strange to me. But then here's the like random thing about Martin Van Buren in a life full of random facts. So in 1848, 18 years after he lost the presidency, he ran for president again. And did he run on the Democratic ticket or the Whig ticket or the Republican ticket? No, he ran on the barn burner ticket, the noted barn burner party of 1848. You might be surprised, but he didn't get a single electoral vote. It was a very undignified way for a former president to go out, but it still gets even worse. Van Buren was sort of a doddering, kind of, strange personality. And as the Civil War broke out, he was still alive. And he got a letter from former President Buchanan, and it said, hey, listen, there's a whole bunch of former presidents who are alive today, and you're the oldest one. Why don't we all send a letter talking about how the Civil War breaks our heart and how we should, speak up for this plan and try to negotiate a stalemate and so on and so forth. And Van Buren wrote him back and said, nah, you're the most recent president. He started bickering about the details, right? About,
They're like never mind.
This very important letter, right? And like, well, no, you're the most recent president, and maybe you should go first, or maybe this guy should go first, and blah blah blah. And so this letter never happened. Like none of these presidents ever spoke out against the Civil War, which is together, which is so fascinating. And so like, what a weird career this guy had. And I got to say, of all those facts, I mean, I kind of knew the okay thing, but from his linguistic preferences, or whatever you want to call it, his linguistic origins, to his horrible retirement, that's the fascinating and weird story of Martin Van Buren.
Well, that was a good story, Mike. That's going to be hard to beat. We did not plan this at all, because what Mike and I do on these episodes is we don't tell each other what the stories are going to be ahead of time. We kind of give each other subject matter, so we don't do the same one. Yeah. But other than that was a good one. I really like that, and we didn't plan this, but that was a great entree for my story, because my story involves the president kind of right after that, not exactly after that, but who beat old Kinderhook. That was William Henry Harrison, and his vice president was John Tyler. 1790 was when John Tyler was born. The same year
that, roughly the same time that the Constitution came into being, right?
Right, exactly. Yes, that's right. John Tyler, that's when he was born. So he was the vice president, and he had a typical career as a politician. He was a congressman, he was a governor, he was a U.S. senator. Here's what I find interesting is that as U.S. senator, I find it interesting in respect of what my later story is going to be. But he supported Andrew Jackson. So this is how far back the guy goes, right? People didn't like him. In 1842, during his presidency, there was an impeachment proposal. And I love the grounds for the impeachment proposal in 1842. The grounds for the impeachment proposal was the high crimes and misdemeanor of endeavoring to excite a disorganizing and revolutionary spirit in the country. Those were the grounds for the proposal. So can you imagine if they had that today? I mean, that's like no one.
Yeah, and it was very much, let the constitutional wonk jump in. It was very much an issue of constitutional interpretation, whether the vice president would ascend to the power of the presidency but still be called vice president, or whether he would actually become the president. And so that's why there is a big debate.
John Tyler ascended in 1841 because William Henry Harrison passed away. Because of that, and that was like uncharted constitutional grounds at that time. Right now, I mean, today in 2024 or 2023, we know, right? He's gonna ascend. The vice president is going to take office. It wasn't really solid ground then. So for the rest of his career, many people would not refer to him as his presidency. They would refer to him as his accidency, which he hated, but I think it's pretty damn funny. So here's the story that I want to tell you. John Tyler, born in 1790, in the middle of his political career, endorsed Andrew Jackson, became president in 1841, our 10th president. What number are we up to now, Mike?
46, is that right?
Yeah, okay. I take your word. Yeah. He still has a grandson alive. No, I'm not kidding. He doesn't have a great-grandson. He doesn't have a great-grandson. He has a grandson. He has a dude who's like, hey, granddad. And that was John Tyler, born in 1790. To me, this is one of the most amazing pieces of trivia, political or not. How could a dude born in 1790 have a grandson? He had two, right? But one died in 2020, and one is still alive. He married Julie Gardner Tyler when she was 24 and he was 54. So we had a 30-year difference there, right? Then in 1853, he gave birth to a son when he was 63. And that was Lyon Gardner Tyler. So he gave birth to a son in 1863. Then Lion Gardner Tyler was in his 70s when he had Harrison Tyler Ruffin and Lion Gardner Tyler Jr. Those were the two sons of Lion Gardner Tyler. So he was in his 70s, and the living one, Harrison Ruffin, he was born in 1928. So he is still alive today, almost 100 years old, but he is still alive. Interestingly enough, Harrison Tyler Ruffin, he, the son who is still alive, the grandson of John Tyler, he really grew up poor. As you can imagine, having a father in their 70s, right, doesn't bode well, right? And in those days, women, usually didn't work, by and large, just the culture that it was in the 1920s. And we hit the Depression. So he really had nothing. You would think, well, he was the grandson of the president and the governor of Virginia and all this stuff, right? That would have set him up. But actually, he was very poor. He couldn't afford to go to college. But through some relationships with like Franklin Delano Roosevelt, he was able to, have a relationship with Mary Astor of the Astor fortune.
Wow.
And she wrote him a check for $5,000, which enabled him to matriculate to the College of William and Mary. At the College of William and Mary, Harrison Tyler Ruffin, who again is the grandson of John Tyler, he became a chemical engineer, and he actually created a number of very successful chemical companies. And later on in his life, he saved the Sherwood Forest Preserve down in, I believe that's in Virginia. He did a lot of historic preservation, and he donated millions of dollars to the College of William and Mary History Department, which is now named the Harrison Tyler Ruffin History Department at the College of William and Mary. So he, despite having a pretty rough childhood during the Depression, he actually became very, very successful and is still kicking. However, Mike, there is a sad note from everything I've read. He's currently suffering from dementia, and this has been going on since the late teens. I think 2016, anyway, somewhere in there. And he, probably doesn't have a lot longer with us. But you know what? God bless you, Harrison Tyler Ruffin, for being the grandson of our 10th president.
It is an amazing story, and it blows your mind when you think about all the things that his grandfather witnessed. And it sometimes comes to mind those things that people will say about how the United States is really only 3 generations old, because there's always somebody who, is alive today who, when they were, 4 years old, they met, the 100-year-old who had met George Washington, right? And that's amazing how things can be transmitted that way. 2 quick anecdotes, and I know we got to wrap. First is, when I was in office, I had the grandson of a president come apply to work as a field rep in my office, work as a field rep in my Burbank office of a state representative making $45,000 a year. And actually did not hire him because I thought it was beneath his dignity. I know that sounds weird. And I didn't want the pressure of a famous, and this is a famous political family.
Wow.
Yeah. And it was kind of strange. I just thought it was kind of strange and kind of sad that he was applying for jobs like that. Especially because his grandfather was president. His grandfather's on a coin. Let's put it that way.
Okay.
And the second fascinating fact that about history is, when I was studying Roman history at UCLA, I remember one day vividly, we were reading some source about, something that had happened in, 2,000 years ago. And we were like, how is this guy writing about this? It was like the eruption of Vesuvius or something like that. And it was like, well, no, even though he wrote this like 100 years later, his grandfather or, his great uncle or something like that was there. And so this was in many ways, it wasn't like he was writing about ancient history. He was writing about the stories he had heard as a kid from his family. And you imagine that there's probably some of that with the Tyler family too. So what a fantastic story. Yeah. I think I vote for yours. Even though,
well, can I throw an FYI in?
Yeah.
I want to throw an FYI in, which is, if you want to get technical and go for great-grandfather for Harrison Tyler Ruffin, his great-grandfather John Tyler Sr. was actually hung out with Thomas Jefferson, and they played fiddles together, and he was also the governor of Virginia. So we don't even have to go back that far, though. We just go back to his granddad.
That's amazing.
Yeah.
Well, folks, vote in the comments. Tell us which one of those 2 presidential facts blew your mind, and we'll see you next time.
All right, man. Thanks.
Hey, if you like what you hear, like and subscribe. It really means a lot, and we would love to have you coming back every week. Thank you.